Dr. Alan Donsky. You can take it away.
Hello, welcome everyone. Once again, a nice opportunity on a beautiful fall evening. Here in Calgary, we certainly have had a couple of nights where the Northern Lights have been spectacular. And it reminds us of a certain kind of intimacy that we have with ourselves and the mystery of being alive and all of that. Mindfulness, of course, is really what it's at. And every now and again, it's a pleasure to, just like a good homing pigeon, to come back to some basics. And there's nobody better this evening than to have my colleague, mentor, teacher, friend, Phil Blustein, to just go back to basics every now and again. We often fly off on tangents, which, while relevant, we sometimes forget the basics. So this evening is a good refresher for all of us. Reminder that we have two websites which are linked. The one is www.thebreathproject.org, and then another website, W2M, Wellness Through Mindfulness. And that website's wtm.thebreathproject.org. For those of you who may be new this evening, we actually started this about 6 years ago, a group of us as mindful practitioners, to bring mindfulness to the general community in a spirit of offering the work freely, and none of the speakers are paid. And there's also an opportunity, I'll mention it again at the end, to just make a very small donation on the website. We do have some expenses ongoing. We don't need to rent a hall anymore. We hope to get back at some point to the Shaganappi Community Center. But any small donation helps for the upkeep of the website, administration, and there are some costs in relation to that. Again, we'd, as always, like to thank Patrick Mealy and Maya, who is a frequent co-host with us at the Calgary Public Library, and it's an opportunity we're very, very grateful for, to be able to support the community at large. We do have a couple of upcoming talks. All the upcoming talks and events are listed on our website, wtm.thebreathproject.org. In 2 weeks' time, we have a talk and a presentation by Anne Mahoney, a very skillful practitioner and teacher herself, talking about living skillfully with COVID. And mindfulness always reminds us that, you know, in some sense, we can either be living skillfully or unskillfully. In 4 weeks' time, I will be offering a chat entitled Resting in Every Moment, a mindful way to the harmony of silence. And in a world of noise, we can sometimes feel very fractured. So being able to rest and find harmonics. A reminder, please type your questions in the chat room. We'll be starting questions at 8 o'clock. And then if there are questions and that carry on beyond 8:30, we'll be happy to stay on and answer any further questions beyond that. So without any other comments, Phil, we're 6 minutes after 7. And over to you, Phil, for a wonderful evening. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Alan, for your kind introduction. And I'd like to thank everybody who has come this evening. What I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you my understanding of mindfulness as it has evolved to this moment in time. And it keeps changing. And I'm going to give you a perspective of mindfulness that is really very different, I think, than what the contemporary understanding is. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to spend time and give you 3 practical, effective strategies that you can bring in to actualize what mindfulness is. Now, in order to start the evening off, what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a sense of where you are coming from, what your understanding of mindfulness is. And I would invite you to enter into the chat at this point in time what you believe mindfulness is. And as we will discover, there is no right answer to this question. So this will be very helpful for me to get an understanding of where we start from as it relates to your understanding of mindfulness. So please, I need your input into the chat in order to know where to go with this.
Phil, excuse me, could you please bring your microphone a little closer? We would just need your volume a little bit increased. Thank you.
No problem. I'm just going to go to my sound. I'll be right there in a second. How's that, Maya?
Much better. That's it. Perfect. Thank you so much, Phil.
Okay, so what do we have here? Attention to the lived moment in order to navigate my life. Self-awareness and paying kind attention to the right thing at the right time. So it sounds like we have this sense of being aware, focusing on the present. So bringing awareness to the present moment seems to be a dominant theme. Understanding self and relating to others. So now there is a relational component coming into this. Coping with insomnia, this capacity as a therapeutic strategy. Do we have any other offerings just to help us move on with this? And non-judgmental and loving kindness, moment-to-moment awareness. Again, that non-judgmental, which we will address further. And paying attention moment-to-moment, non-judgmentally. Thank you very much. So let's be clear about this. Mindfulness did originate from Buddhism. Mindfulness as a term came into existence in the late 1800s, and it was a British Pali scholar, Rhys Davids, who translated the Pali word sati, S-A-T-I, as mindfulness. He felt sati meant memory, but in a Buddhist context, sati meant to remember, to recollect, to bear in mind. And in essence, it was to keep in mind what was on your mind, sustained awareness, and importantly, to remember the teachings of the Buddha. That's what it meant, not memory in the sense of trying to remember something that has happened before. Mindfulness did not exist in isolation. And the Buddha described right mindfulness. And we'll have the second slide, Maya. And what, monks, is right mindfulness? Here a monk dwells contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed covetousness and displeasure in regard to the world. So what's interesting is the understanding that mindfulness did not exist in isolation. It was the seventh part of the Eightfold Path, and mindfulness always existed in the context of ethical and skillful behavior. Clearly comprehending was to remind one that there were three marks of existence in the world. Everything is impermanent. To grab onto it will lead to suffering, and the sense of self is conditional. That the main purpose of mindfulness historically was to decide, is what is present skillful or not, and how to act skillfully or not. And this was a contemplative path. Can you reach nibbana, the end of suffering, the end of greed, hatred, and delusion? I'll take the slide down. This dramatically changed in the late 1900s. The Burmese monks reinterpreted mindfulness. So what went on was that the English colonized Burma in 1885. This was a tremendous problem to the Burmese monks because it was the nobility that supported the monks, and they were gone once the British came. So the monks in Burma needed to reach out to the lay community, both for financial support, and as a means to ensure that Buddhism continued. Mahasi Sayadaw was a Burmese monk who was very influential, and he reinterpreted mindfulness as lucid, present moment awareness, non-judgmentally. There's a very significant distinction that he drew. This was a direct contradiction to historic mindfulness that was a judgmental process. He was saying, no, non-judgmental. And we have to understand that Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein were students of Mahasi Sayadaw. And these were some of the earliest American Buddhist practitioners that influenced our understanding of mindfulness. Jon Kabat-Zinn in 1979 created the MBSR program, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. He created a secularized version of Buddhism that was foundational for Western contemporary mindfulness. He adopted this as a secularized version of Buddhism, and its original intent was for relief of pain that patients had. Slide 3. So his definition of mindfulness is foundational, and it is reflected in some of the comments that were made about one's understanding of mindfulness. Paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. So what is crucial in this understanding of mindfulness is the word non-judgmentally. And again, I would ask for your input here. How do you interpret the term non-judgmentally in the context of mindfulness? And I would invite you to put your thoughts down in the chat at this point. What does non-judgmental mean as it relates to mindfulness? Let me take the slide down, Maya. So let's see what we have there in the chat. What does non-judgmental mean to you when you think about mindfulness? So being in a state of intention, simply observing, acceptance of what is, to not criticize myself for having an experience, viewing things as neither good or bad. Okay. Self-compassion, acceptance of what is without trying to control. So there really seems to be a strong component of the capacity to observe compassionately, with some equanimity and without judgment. So, at face value, when I think of the term non-judgmental, to me it means don't judge. It's important to understand how Jon Kabat-Zinn came to his understanding of mindfulness and his definition. He was certainly a sincere Buddhist practitioner, and he had a strong Theravada or historic Buddhist approach. But even more importantly, he had a strong Korean Zen, non-dual Buddhist tradition. Slide 4. And I don't think we're very aware, really, of what Jon Kabat-Zinn's original intent was for mindfulness. This is his statement. There was, from the very beginning of MBSR, an emphasis on non-duality and the non-instrumental dimension of practice, and thus on non-doing, non-striving, not knowing, non-attachment to outcomes. He had a strong belief in the absolute reality of existence, according to Zen. What does that mean? Well, it meant that we were all Buddhas, We all were perfect, permanent, and pure. We understood things non-conceptually, that there was no need for judgment, preference making, that everything could be held with equanimity, neither good nor bad, and that there was a sense of this non-duality, no separation of subject or object. So is that the way you understand mindfulness? It seems to be quite a bit of difference from his original intent. We'll take the slide down. And so I think this is very important to understand that there is really quite a distinction between Jon Kabat-Zinn's Zen understanding of mindfulness, non-conceptual, non-judgmental, non-doing, as opposed to historic understanding of mindfulness that was a cognitive, judgmental, and dual approach. So I think the first question we need to address is being judgmental detrimental and something we should not be doing as it relates to our moment-to-moment experience? So why do we make judgments and preferences? Well, as humans, we're really very strange creatures. We are never with what just presents itself. We're always changing it. All of us have created a belief system about who we believe we are and how we should behave in the world. And every moment that we encountered is referenced against this belief system. Have I, Phil, acted in a way that I believe I should behave? And why do I do that? Because our belief system is based on the understanding that I have some deficiencies, some flaws, some incompleteness. And I constantly struggle to deal with this sense of insecurity. Am I safe? Am I loved? Am I worthy? So in every moment, we are judging ourselves against who we believe we are. And in reality, it may not be a very effective approach, but the intent is to keep us safe. So self-judgment at its core is a very important, effective defense mechanism for us who believe we have a sense of self. In response to the self-judgment, we then make a preference. Is this something I want, or is this something I don't want? Desire, aversion. This helps to support how we are going to subsequently act. And we often act from a position of coping strategies that we've created that are unique for us to keep us safe, loved, and worthy. It is only at this point in time that we are aware of what our minds have already created. Our minds have automatically, subconsciously, autonomously encountered the moment, judged it, judged myself, created a preference, and acted on it often, unskillfully, often many of the times. Once we become aware of the self, we identify with it. Who else would myself be except me? So it's at this moment in time that contemporary mindfulness is saying, be non-judgmental. But bear in mind that we are actually asked to be non-judgmental of the judgment we have already made about ourselves. We have already gone through this process of judgment making. Judgment is a thinking process. It's a cognitive process. That's how we evaluate things. So how does one be non-judgmental? Is that just another thinking process of how one shouldn't judge? Does one just simply say, I will not judge, and then proceed? I believe that what we need at this point in time is not to be non-judgmental, but what we need to do is to take a mindful pause, that we need to interrupt this spontaneous process that is carried on by our minds without us knowing anything, if we're going to have any hope of being able to stop what's going on, hold it, and examine it. We function on autopilot, and we need to create some control if we're going to act in a skillful way. I lose my keys, and instantly my mind says, oh my God, how could you have lost your keys? This is terrible. I am terrible. I'm so careless. I am so stupid. I'll never drive my car again. I'll never be able to get into my house again. And then associated with those critical thoughts is that feeling of fluttering in my belly, tightness in my chest, shortness of breath, rapid beating of my heart. And so normally, what do we do with this? When we get self-criticized and self-judged, what is our normal response? Well, our normal tendency is to turn away. Why approach something that we don't like? Why go near the fire? And so this is really a very critical juncture in understanding what mindfulness is. Paradoxically, mindfulness is asking us to turn towards the experience, to engage it, not to run away from it. Very, very important point. And we can engage experience cognitively through our thinking mind, or we can directly and experientially feel it through our bodies. And mindfulness asks us, once we become aware of what is happening, put the brakes on, and then engage what is happening through our bodies. It's asking us to turn towards our experience, to allow ourselves to feel what has been spoken through us in a somatic way, to be open to it, to listen to it without resistance, and hopefully in a way that offers self-compassion and wisdom. It's important to recognize that what we need to do at this point is not be non-judgmental. We need to engage with our experience in a direct and experiential way. And this is not engagement or acceptance in the sense of I'm okay with it being right or wrong, good or bad, but more in a sense of acknowledgement, of understanding and recognizing what is present. So the question is, why can't we turn towards our discomfort? Why can't we feel what's going on in our body? Because I don't know about you, but when I'm feeling upset, I'm turning away from it. We are both tormentor and tormented at the same time. We are both what judges and what is being judged at the same time. And so when we identify with our sense of self, we own all that self-criticism, we own all that self-judgment. And there is no possibility of offering ourselves compassion. What's the definition of compassion? To feel with someone, to act for someone. There is this real duality of a subject and an object, that the subject is acting on behalf of the object. So we cannot offer ourselves compassion and understanding when we are both what is judging and what is being judged at the same time. The Buddha was absolutely amazing. It's 2,600 years ago, he had this insight. Anything we attach to is I, me, or mine leads to suffering. He had this understanding about the true nature of reality, the true nature of self, that the self is a temporary, ephemeral construct made up moment to moment, and it is not permanent, and it is not enduring, and it is not solid. So that the essence of mindfulness is not about being non-judgmental. The essence of mindfulness is the capacity to disidentify, to non-attach with our sense of self, so that we then have the ability to hold our experience and extend compassion to ourselves. Because at that point in time, do we have the capacity to rest in the awareness that knows the experience that contains the story of self, rather than being the sense of self that's having the experience. What we're asked to do is to hold our sense of self that is in pain, that is suffering. And that's all any of us wants when we're not feeling good about ourselves. Is there someone there to listen to what we have to say? Not provide advice, but just to hear us. And in essence, that is what mindfulness is doing. It is simply hearing, giving voice to our pain, holding it, honoring it, and hopefully healing it. Because the voice that speaks to us is not just this adult voice in the present moment. It is our wounded past, our wounded child that is speaking through us in this present moment. There's no question that non-attachment with self is not an easy thing to do. And it has taken me years to have a sense and understanding of what that means. And this is not about a denial that there is a sense of self. It's just the fact that we are not the sense of self, that it has been constructed and serves a very utilitarian function in our life in order for us to pay our bills and go to work. But the point is, it is something that has been constructed on a moment-to-moment basis that serves a function, and that we have this unbelievable capacity to rest in a part of our mind that is awareness, that is knowing, that has compassion and wisdom that is innate. The problem with contemporary mindfulness is not just what it doesn't say, not what it says, but what it doesn't say. So we're present with something non-judgmentally, with equanimity, with no preference making. Well, then how do we know what to do with it? Every moment informs us what to do in the next moment. Is this moment skillful or not? And how should I act in a skillful way in response to what has just happened? But there has to be some sense of understanding what it is in order to respond appropriately. And this has been one of the big criticisms of contemporary mindfulness, that there is no ethical, there's no skillful aspect to the definition of what mindfulness is. And John Kabat-Zinn says, ethics is implicit in the teaching, Well, I think we need to have it explicit in order to actualize it. And ultimately, it's not that we judge. The problem with judgment is, what is the reference point we judge it to? You see, normally when we judge things, it's about us. It's about, how does this moment make me feel? How does it resonate with my unmet need? That's the problem, that the judgment, the reference point, is self-centered. Now, if we can be with a sense of self, with non-attachment, then that opens up the possibility that the reference point can be changed. And instead of I and me, what is needed, we can simply be with the self and in relationship with it from non-attachment, but then be able to move on and be able to reference what is present from universal ethics and values, interconnectedness, compassion, and wisdom. And ultimately, could there even be this possibility that one could transition from self-referential judgment? In other words, we reference everything to who we are, to non-self-referential discernment, that we reference everything to a non-self-centered perspective. And at that point, there is the capacity to not even need to create a sense of self in some moments. With mindfulness, we're trying to interrupt this automatic, unconscious default mode of judging everything relative to ourself. And can we at least initially bring awareness to the intentionality of what we are going to do, rather than being aware after we've acted? It's only when we bring intentionality to our action that we have the capacity to choose how we will respond. And if we try and act non-judgmentally, we run the risk of what is called spiritual bypassing. In other words, we behave from a position of being spiritual and contemplative and deny our core issues that never goes away and is always there to continue to cause a problem. Slide 5. To summarize, I see mindfulness as a process that evolves from being aware of what is happening to being able to non-attach to the sense of self that allows us to come close to our experience and offer compassion. And ultimately, can we come to a position of non-self-referential discernment, such that we don't judge our experience relative to what our unmet needs are, but to what is universal and ethical and moral. And take the slide down. So, Buddhism mindfulness is not monolithic. It does not have one definition. There is no uniform and right definition of mindfulness and Buddhism, because Buddhism constantly has evolved and has constantly adapted to the culture and to the local religion in which it existed. I believe that it's one's responsibility to examine these different understandings of Buddhism and to choose for yourself, what is it that you want from mindfulness? Is it enhanced attention? Is it as a therapeutic strategy to relieve stress and decrease pain? Or is it a transformative process that allows you to move beyond your conditioned sense of self and operate from an ethical and skillful position. And that if one is really serious and dedicated in this practice of mindfulness, one's understanding, one's purpose, one's intentionality for what they want from mindfulness will change and evolve. And I can certainly vouch for that as I see how my understanding of mindfulness has changed progressively over the last 30 years. But perhaps we should not even use the term mindfulness, because when I say that, what comes to mind? Your mind. And mindfulness is more than just the mind. It encompasses our thinking mind, our affective and emotional states, and our physical sensations. It's an integrative process of awareness, of relationship with the sense of self, and skillful action. Slide 6. And so I believe we should call it wholefulness. And in a broad sense, I see wholefulness / mindfulness as a relational process with a sense of self resulting in skillful action. Slide 7. And in a more specific sequential understanding, I see it as awareness with engaged discernment, leading to non-attachment with the sense of self and skillful action. I think that wholefulness is really how we are in relationship, moment to moment, self to self. And can we move beyond the default mode of our automatic judging mind to a place that is able to be present from the magic and mystery of what it is to be human and what we engage with? So bear in mind, mindfulness is not freedom from pain and suffering. It really is the freedom to be with pain and suffering. So, slide 8. So what I'd like to do for the rest of our time together is to outline 3 practical, effective strategies that you can bring mindfulness to. And I call this the ABC of mindfulness: awareness, breath and body, cognition, and choice. Initially, we need to develop awareness of what's going on. How else can we relate to anything if we don't know what's happening? Studies have demonstrated that we are aware 47% of the time. To me, that sounds like an understatement. Slide 9. So when we think about awareness, I like to talk about the smile of awareness. And these are the important components that we think of: sustained meta-awareness, intentional, label, and evoked cues. And so I'd invite you to do this exercise. And if everybody could just sit up on their chairs and bring awareness to whatever is most obvious. Is it what you are seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, thinking? But are you aware of something without having to do anything to be aware? And now I would ask you to intentionally bring your awareness to the physical sensations of the movement of the breath at the tip of your nostrils. Can you direct your awareness? And now can you bring sustained awareness to the tip of your nostrils? So one can see that awareness is spontaneous and a natural phenomena, but we have the capacity to control it. Now close your eyes and bring awareness again to the thoughts and emotions. We are wonderful storytellers. And when my mind and your mind is caught up in a great story, we are just in that story. We are the pain, the anger, the sadness. But what we aren't is knowing what is happening. Meta-awareness is a very important component of awareness, to know what you know. And there's a very simple technique that can help bring meta-awareness and awareness to the present moment. And that is called labeling your experience. Can you put into words what you are aware of? In a general sense, this could simply be thinking, feeling, sensing. In a more specific sense, it could be judging, sadness, cramping. It's important not to use the word I am sad, because it just tends to perpetuate the enduring sense of self. And mindfulness is a process, and it can be supported by labeling what you know in the following way. Knowing judging, knowing sadness, knowing pain. You see, in order to be able to label your experience, you have had to step back. You've had to step out of the identification. And so labeling is a wonderful, simple, effective technique to support awareness, meta-awareness, and disidentification. So I would invite you to just close your eyes, sit up in your chair, bring awareness to whatever you experience, and just practice for a minute labeling what it is that you know. So one of the great problems we have with awareness is that we just don't remember to be aware. We can use what are called evoked cues to help us remember, such that when the cue comes up, that is the reminder, the stimulus to look and say, hey, what's happening? This could be an alarm on your watch, an app on your smartphone, a Post-it note, or what are called physical cues. Perhaps it's before or after you eat, go to the bathroom, send an email, text, at a red light, waiting in line, walking through a door. And when this physical cue comes up, it says, what's going on? Bring awareness. So, bring a smile to your awareness, but in particular, start labeling your experience as a very effective way to anchor you into awareness, meta-awareness, and to support disidentification. Let's go to the B, the breath of the ABC of mindfulness. And we'll go to slide 10. When we are agitated and we are activated, we cannot talk our way out of this. We cannot use language to self-regulate. Our brains go offline. And the only way we can communicate is with our breath and our body. And the breath is the most effective, accessible, practical strategy to deal with acute anxiety and emotional dysregulation. This is through the ABCDE of breathing. And I gave a whole talk on this, and it's available on the WTM website. But to briefly summarize, we want to A, bring awareness to our breath. BC, breathe calmly. D, breathe from our diaphragm such that it is our belly that rises with inhalation and not our chest. And E, emphasize exhalation such that we breathe out longer than we breathe in. And when we breathe deeply and emphasize exhalation, physiologically, we support what is called the parasympathetic part of our autonomic nervous system that supports relaxation. So when you get agitated, you need to balance yourself with your breath before you do anything. Bring your awareness to the ABCDE of breathing and breathe in this way as long as it takes to settle. If you don't have the time, 5 breaths. If you don't have the time, 1 breath in for a count of 4 and a count of 6 out. So now let's go to the last component of strategies that you can use for mindfulness, and that is your body. You can take the slide off, Maya. After bringing awareness to the present moment and stabilizing your anxiety with your breath, what mindfulness is asking us to do is to feel our bodies, to directly, experientially feel what is living through us in the moment. Why is the body so important? Well, when you're with your breath in your body, you can only be in one place, the present moment. But when you're with your mind, you can be remembering the past, thinking about the future. So the body is a wonderful way to bring you into the here and now and get you out of your thinking mind. Our thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations are all interconnected, such that when we think, it's expressed in our emotions and our bodies. So our bodies are wonderful messengers of what is going on in our thinking mind and our emotional states. And our bodies serve a very important primal biologic function for survival. What is critical to understand is that even before we had the capacity for language, when we experienced stress, this would be manifested through our bodies. But the problem is that that energy never went through us. It never reached completion or resolution and has remained trapped within us. And just think what happens whenever you feel uncomfortable with your thinking and your thoughts. You get this terribly uncomfortable sensation in your body, and you just don't want to go there. So every time our body is calling out to us, what do? We put a wall up. We deny it. We run away from it. We hide from it. And so we never allow our trapped energy to be expressed. The only way we can communicate with this trapped energy in our body is through our body, through our physical sensations. And it's very important to bear in mind that when we turn our attention to our body, we're not just feeling a physical sensation, a cramp, a fluttering, a twist. Associated with that is a historic, non-verbal, primal trauma that you carry, whether you recognize it or not. It is calling to be heard, and we are turning a deaf ear for it because we can't turn towards it because it's too uncomfortable. It's important to try and be able to connect with our somatic expression, because what we're doing is we are giving voice to our historic trauma. We are hearing it, we are holding it, we are honoring it, and hopefully we are able to heal it. And I think it's important to recognize that we need to surrender and trust that our bodies have this innate capacity, innate wisdom to process this held, trapped energy that reflects our stress. So we're going to do an exercise to end, to look at the value of the body in being mindful. But before we do the exercise, I just want to preface it by saying that if you think in any way that touching into the physicality of what has gone on will re-trigger a historic memory of trauma or stress for you, don't do this exercise. And when it's over, I'll raise my hand and invite you back. So I would invite everybody to sit up in your chair, close your eyes, and bring awareness to whatever comes into your consciousness, what you think, what you are feeling emotionally. And then if something arises, deliberately focus your awareness on your body. How are the thoughts and the emotions expressed through your body? Can you simply allow yourself to get as close as you can to that sensation? And now bring to mind a memory, moderate intensity, not deep intensity, of when you felt criticized, judged, unloved. And again, direct your attention to how that is expressed physically. So I invite everybody back now. The problem we have in turning towards our somatic expression of when we're sad or angry or upset is that it's just too darn uncomfortable to go there, because we are touching into something that is stressful, traumatic. And so the way you can deal with that is a 3-step process. When you're getting upset, agitated, your body feels uncomfortable, first do a very quick body scan. Bring your awareness to the soles of your feet and ascend up your body quickly to the top of your head and just localize, where is that feeling? Second, you need to stabilize. You need to ground yourself into the part of your body that is neutral. And that is often the soles of your feet and your buttocks. And what you want to then do is, where's the hot spot? Now let's go to a neutral spot, ground myself, get collected. And then third, what you're going to do is you're going to rise, bring your awareness slowly from the neutral spot to as close as you can get to the hot spot. Bearing in mind that you may not get to the hot spot, and that's okay. And at times there may be this overwhelming sense of, I don't even want to be where I am. And then you go back to the neutral spot, stabilize. And there can be this oscillating, pendulating movement from neutrality to discomfort. And so that hopefully in time, we slowly begin to get more attuned. We're able to be with that physicality that's uncomfortable. And maybe we don't. And maybe we only get that close, but that's okay. Can you bring up the last slide, number 11? So our bodies are very important because they are a reflection of really what's going on within us at this point in time. And really what is essential is the capacity to embody the experience, to try and sustain that awareness for as long as you can. And if you can, stay with it until it surrenders into stillness, which is a beautiful example of the impermanence of our sensations. Peter Levine is a wonderful resource for somatic experiencing. So slide 12. So what I've tried to do this evening is to give you an understanding of what I see wholefulness is about. That there is no right definition. That what is it that you want from it? And that it is only through a dedicated practice will you ultimately be able to see the results. That what we're really looking at is wholefulness is a relational process with the present moment, with our sense of self. And ultimately, if we can come to that place of non-attachment, disidentification with the self, then we have the capacity to turn towards our self that is suffering, towards our inner child that is wounded and is underlying ourself. And we have the capacity to hold our pain and suffering. And there is this innate processing that ultimately allows it to move through us. That I don't really believe this is being non-judgmental. And bear in mind that that was the particular interpretation of one person and his Korean Zen Buddhism. And I think that mindfulness is so much more than that. And to remember the 3 simple things that you can do to be mindful, to start this process. Bring awareness to what's happening and label it. Use words to describe what is happening. If you're really agitated, use your breath and the ABCDE of breathing to regulate your emotional system. And very importantly, engage what is happening through your body. Because physical sensations are not what you are bringing your awareness to. What you are doing is you're bringing the ability to hold your pain, to hold your suffering, that everything that we always wanted to have, but probably never got. The last 2 components are cognition. How we use our thinking mind to understand our sense of self and the nature of reality, and how we can choose what we need to do to act skillfully. And I plan to talk about cognition and choice when I do a part 2 of mindfulness. And so at this point in time, I want to thank you all for listening to my perspective on mindfulness, and I'm happy to hear and address any of your questions along with Alan. So we'll take the slide off, please, and we'll bring Alan into the presentation. And so if there are any questions, please, this is the time. You have both Alan and myself to address anything you want to ask us.
Let me just, while people are reflecting, Phil, just a big thank you. And I was playing around on the backgrounds earlier tonight, and I found this old television set. And in that moment of leaning in, I said, this is a perfect metaphor, because we often, those of us who are old enough to remember these, you often had to tune in exquisitely to the frequency to get the right signal. And in a way, mindfulness is a metaphor for that tuning in, the attunement, the being with, the connection with ourselves and what's going on. Again, Phil, thank you so much for really covering a huge territory and being able to really bring it into something very, very practical. So you covered the outer world and the way we view ourselves and construct ourselves. You covered the inner world and our relationship to ourselves. You touched on how previous experiences show up on autopilot, how we meet them in the moment. And then ultimately, you also moved to covering the future with compassion and wisdom and kindness and skillful means. So really a huge territory for anyone to cover so skillfully. And so a big thank you to you. While people might be just reflecting and taking in the breadth and the depth of this, Phil, I'll start. I don't see any other questions at the moment in the chat room. I'm wondering, Phil, if you can say a little more about your experience of that stillness that we can come to. And some people say, well, that's just mindfulness making me calm. Just something else there in that stillness that perhaps runs deeper.
So, Alan, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well. But I think we need to be clear from the beginning, as I see it, that the intent of meditation and mindfulness is not to have a silent and a still mind. I always use my old joke that there are only two ways we can have a still and a silent mind, and that is death and coma. And that's not what mindfulness is about. So that mindfulness is not that you're going to have a mind that's quiet, it doesn't criticize, it doesn't judge you. But the essence of mindfulness is the capacity to be able to stay in the fire, to be with what is. And so I think I'd much rather address it from that perspective of giving people permission to have crazy minds. And I think this is one of the big problems that people have when they start to meditate. Oh my God, I can't meditate. There's just so much going on in my mind. And how do I deal with it? Well, they say we have 60,000 thoughts a day. And for some of my meditations, it seems like all 60,000 thoughts were there at the time of my meditation. So it's okay to have a thinking mind. But mindfulness, in essence, is the relationship with it. And I really have always had tremendous difficulty with the non-judgmental aspect of it, in the sense that it is a direct contradiction to historic Buddhism. That doesn't mean that that is the right type of mindfulness. But first of all, when you understand what John Kabat-Zinn meant about non-judgmental, it blew my mind away when I read that it really just was reflecting the fact that this was a non-dual approach to existence. And how many of us, and how many Zen practitioners, and I am not a Zen practitioner, live on the absolute rather than the relative realm. And I think the essence of mindfulness is not that you are non-judgmental. I think the essence of mindfulness ultimately is the capacity to be present without attachment to yourself, that allows you to turn towards it, to inhabit it, to engage it, to feel it, and allow it to be processed. What are your thoughts about the silence aspect? And what do you think, Alan?
Prior to answering that, I may just ask people actually two comments. Someone in the audience has raised their hand. We're not taking live questions, so please type it in the box just for confidentiality and privacy questions. And perhaps to add to Phil's question at the beginning of the session, Phil asked all of us, what is our sort of sense of mindfulness? Perhaps I can ask people to begin reflecting and even typing it in the chat room. Do you have a different sense of mindfulness now that you've heard Phil's presentation? What's alive for you? What's come up in the course of this? And perhaps that may trigger some conversation in the chat room. I think for me, again, it's an experience, and I didn't see it as a goal initially. And I think what made John Kabat-Zinn's MBSR program, and for those a reminder needed, mindfulness-based stress reduction. So what people discovered is as they leaned into their experiences without judging it, they discovered that they could have a different relationship with it other than being at war. So people noticed that their pain, their chronic illness, their malignancy, whatever they had, that they could have a different relationship with it. And in that settling, I sort of experience it as a ceasefire. I'm not at war with myself anymore. And when I'm not at war with myself, that is more patient and kind and compassionate and realistic, and I can heal, and I can bring that energy that I find in the leaning into it, the freedom to be with it, for me creates a certain space, a certain energy, and that can be variously called silence or the inner space or quiet. It's not nothing going on, but it's more a quality of my experience with myself that I find there's a stillness. For me, it also has echoes of when I'm not at war, I can see the impermanence, that there will be moments of confusion and moments of clarity. It's not that I have to get rid of the one or the other. And I will be touching on this in a month's time in the talk about the harmony, that it's all harmony. It comes, it goes. And that trying to hang on to the yummy stuff and keep away the yucky stuff is what actually causes a lot of suffering. So can we be in wise relation to the flow of nature, this flow of life, the flow of impermanence? And in that freedom to be with it, as you call it, Phil, it's a lovely phrase, I find a certain stillness. We have a couple of questions, Phil. Thank you for, thanks. Can you give us an example on how mindfulness helps the body release trauma?
So thank you very much. Good question. You know, as we talked about before, our normal response to things that bother us is to run away, is to deny. And so experiential avoidance never solves anything because we never deal with what's going on, and all we're doing is we're pushing it down. And think about what happens when you have a beach ball that's under water and you try and hold it down, and then finally it pops up with a greater force than what existed before. And so I think the value of mindfulness is its initial capacity to turn towards the experience, to be willing to see it and to be willing to feel it. And it's in some sense is giving it validity. It says, yeah, I mean, think about it when you get upset and you know, you don't know what to say, and finally you say it. And isn't there that sense of release when you finally can say what needs to be said? And so I think what you're really doing is, I think mindfulness in psychological terms is you are creating new attachment patterns with your wounded child, because you are willing to simply be present, to listen, and to hold. And I keep coming back to the same point, that it is this capacity to turn into, to feel, and to hold. It's not about judging or not judging. I don't think that is the essence. I really don't. And how do you be non-judgmental? You know, it's always like, I used to read in these books, your thoughts are like clouds. Let them just pass in the sky. And I said, give me a break. I got tsunamis and thunderstorms going up in my head, and I ain't just letting it go. And I've never heard of a strategy of how one is, quote, non-judgmental. I mean, to be judgmental is to be cognitive, to think and to evaluate. So how do I be non-judgmental? How do I be with my mind so that I don't judge it? And I never got that part. That's me.
Yeah. On that point, Phil, I think, and you know, both of us have sat in the presence of John Kabat-Zinn, and what I took away from the one retreat we were both at was that he was highlighting, and this is me, what I took away, I'm not sure whether he intended it or not, was just that we can start off with our woundedness and our suffering, and then we get into that, well, I'm no good, I'm not perfect, I'm not lovable enough, I'm not worthy enough, I'll never be safe, I'm never going to find a partner, I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm too dumb, whatever. And then we start to judge the judging. And what happens, I took away that he was saying, just watch that pattern and notice how much we judge ourselves. So can we sit back and observe the judging of the self? Because otherwise we have the secondary layer, the second wound that we put on ourselves in addition to the original. Anyway, that's a small point as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that to share with the group tonight, try this. Try turning towards what you're feeling in your body when you're upset. You're not trying to figure it out. You're not trying to solve the problem. You're just trying to be with what is there. And maybe it's for only a second, but I think this is the essence of mindfulness. It is an experiential process in the beginning where you're just allowing yourself to touch and be touched by the pain. And this is not to minimize the importance of the cognitive aspect of mindfulness. And I'll just briefly say that the single most important parameter that actually came up for me that helped support my practice was understanding my wounding and my belief system and seeing how it got manifested moment to moment. Let's go on. Do we have another question?
We do, Phil. What's, in your opinion, the difference between non-judgment and non-attachment? What's the difference between non-judgment and non-attachment in your perspective?
So, I think attachment is the key here in the sense that are we going to judge our experience? And for most of us, absolutely. And you're not even in control of what's happening. That's all going on below your level of consciousness, that your mind has just taken whatever it's encountering, judging it against its belief system. Does this make me feel safe or loved or worthy? What does this trigger in terms of my historic memory of my deficiencies? So, as I said, contemporary mindfulness asks us not to judge what we have already judged. So for the most part, we are going to judge. Do we have the capacity to change what we do with the judgment? And this is the old Buddhist talk of the first arrow and the second arrow. We get an arrow, it's painful. Yep. Pain is expecting, suffering is optional. But then what do we do with the pain? Oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world. I'm going to get infected. I'm going to die. We create stories. So the non-attachment aspect is that capacity to be with what you are aware of, but not take ownership of it. It's that disidentification, that we know we have a sense of self and it serves an important function. But when we believe that is who we are, that's the problem. So it's not so much that we judge, it's whether what we do with the judgment that is the freedom point of mindfulness. And I think that's the essence. Now, non-attachment, boy, that's for me, and I've been doing this for a long time, and I probably am a slow learner. It was very difficult. I just couldn't understand. What do you mean I don't have a sense of self? It's right here. I mean, but I gradually, repeatedly, probably reading the same book over and over, going to the same over and over, but thinking about it and contemplating and allowing myself to feel that sense of self and being able to observe, hey, I'm angry right now. Where was that angry? Where was that I who was angry just before I became angry? Wasn't there. And if I stay with the I that is angry, you know what's going to happen to it? It's going to be disappearing, and you're going to be thinking about what's for lunch. So observing that sense of self and how it wasn't there, and now it's there, and now it isn't there. And the problem is that we see our life as a movie rather than as stills of photographs, because every moment is a still, but we connect it all together and we create this enduring sense of self. And so getting into that C part is also very important, that cognition, the cognitive aspect of being able to use your thinking mind to see how you create your sense of self based on meeting unmet needs. That's very important. And in an experiential sense, simply allowing yourself to be with the I that is angry and feeling it. And what is it? What do you feel of an I that is angry? And so that gives you a sense of what it really is experientially. It's a great question, Alan. What do you think? Can you comment on that too?
I agree with you. I would, and those of you who know Phil and I, we often say the same thing in different languaging. So for me, Phil, what popped up as you were describing that was that, yeah, life is a series of stills. And that where was the I? Oh, that's gone. So the anger I identified with, that reminded me of the impermanence, the coming and the going, which is one of the key teachings in the Buddhist tradition. And if things are impermanent, then I can also be rest assured that anger dissolves. No matter how angry I am now, no matter how justified I am now about why I'm angry about this or that, in 5 minutes, I will be thinking about breakfast. So that, in fact, can be quite encouraging, because the story's told of a student who says to his teacher, who claims to be this font of wisdom and light and energy. And the student says, "Hi, teacher, I saw you get angry yesterday." And the teacher goes, "Of course I got angry. The difference is I try not to do anything with it."
Mm-hmm.
I get sad. I try not to do anything with it. And that's that relational piece you spoke about, Phil, to just be able to step back and see it as it is without the instinct to try and push it away, because if I push it away, I'm not in a relationship with it. Or if it's yummy, to try hang on to it forevermore. And not being attached. And if things are impermanent, then there's nothing to attach to. Now, that doesn't mean we just sit there and don't do anything. Of course, we have goals. Of course, we have desires. Of course, we choose to live our lives in certain ways and hopefully more skillfully. But we need to be careful that stuff will come along that will upset our plans. So you can't be attached to outcome. And I have a friend who says, I've always planned for the plan, but I don't try to tell myself that my plan will guarantee the outcome. And that for me is a beautiful phrasing of that non-attachment.
Yeah.
That it doesn't mean you don't have a direction. It doesn't mean you don't commit. It doesn't mean you don't work hard. It doesn't mean you're not honest. It doesn't mean everything's nothing. And so we often hear this misinterpretation of what mindfulness is, that somehow it's an emptying of the self, or there's nothing going on in the mind, or it's a pretending that life isn't painful or difficult. It's none of that. It's meeting it as you described, Phil. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to just to draw a clarification and then maybe just give one final thought as we come to the close of the evening.
Yeah.
This is not about not feeling what is present. There's a real distinction here. Because as we said, we're aware and labeling. We are stabilizing with our breath, but we are becoming intimate with what is going on. It's not like we're stepping back and witnessing and not feeling, but what we are doing is we are allowing ourselves to get into it, but not own it. And I want to share one story I had. It was very profound. And for me, it was the true meaning of mindfulness. And it was, my mother died 2 years ago. And we had gone to the funeral and we were returning back to where everybody was going to sit and meet. And all of a sudden, just this profound sadness and pain came over me. And in that moment, there was this voice inside of my head that says, turn to it. And there was that moment, this sense of allowing to feel what was present. But there was no sense of I was sad. And there was no sense of I was observing what sadness was. It really was just this sense of knowing sadness without a sense of self being present. And it wasn't anything that I did, it just happened. And it lasted for a brief period of time, ended. There's a sense of release and relief, and then it came back again. And so it was a very profound experience for me. And it really, I thought, maybe I really touched into the true sense of mindfulness. It's that capacity to be with what is, but not be the one who is having the experience and not being the one that is witnessing the experience. And in my sense, I think that is what mindfulness is.
Yeah. You've obviously done a wonderful job this evening, Phil. I want to read part of a response from one of the participants. Thank you. It makes sense to me now. Now I know why I've been struggling with the non-judgment perspective. It always felt like I was battling an innate desire to judge, and it was hard not to judge. Non-attachment feels right to me. I've been moving into the state of being more often. I'll rephrase that. I've been moving into the state of being more often since practicing mindfulness. And I think, Phil, that is a beautiful note to begin to wrap things up this evening. We have another 2 minutes till 8:30. I don't even want to summarize anything. Phil's given us the spread, the width, the depth. We've got some simple acronyms at the beginning of the alphabet. And I invite each person here to just see what's alive for you this evening. If you walk away with greater clarity about what questions are important for you, what does mindfulness mean to you? That's valuable. If you walk away with greater confusion, that's wonderful, because something inside of you is asking you for that kind of inner attention and watching and learning. So take that away with you. It's a beautiful talk that will be posted up in a week or two. Once again, I want to thank the library folk and Maya specifically for this evening's support. There are a lot of previous talks, links to videos, lots of information, upcoming presentations. We're hoping one day to be able to meet in person again, because there is a certain intimacy. But I'm also always aware of just how close we can get in a Zoom meeting when the heart and the spirit and the soul is in the right place, and just a true joy. And for those of you who might be moved, any small donation on our website is welcomed. It supported us. And again, none of the speakers are paid for their time, nor is the library. Somebody summed it up beautifully. They said bye-bye and good night. And the final word probably to Maya.